want to introduce Vern Norviel, who is an emeritus partner at Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati, where he was a senior practitioner in the firm's patents and innovations counseling practice. So he has 3 decades of experience formulating successful strategies for life science companies and helping them develop IP programs. That's what we hope to learn a little bit more about and learn from that experience. He's represented a wide variety of companies, as well as venture capital firms in areas such as therapeutics, diagnostics, nanotechnology, genomics, proteomics, personalized medicine. And in fact, I think one interesting fact is that, Vern, you've had your entire genome sequenced, and it's available in a public database. Apparently, you're the first attorney to do that. Not sure if there are a lot who followed suit. Be interested to learn if that's become a practice among life sciences attorneys. Before joining Wilson and Sonsini in 2003, Vern was the general counsel and corporate secretary of Perligen Sciences. And before that, he was senior vice president and general counsel and an early employee of Affymetrix, which was a really important biotechnology company that pioneered and developed DNA chip technology. He also served as a partner at Townsend & Townsend & Crew in Palo Alto. And during that long career, Vern also authored or prosecuted more than 20 patents that have been litigated in the US and around the world. He's overseen intellectual property lawsuits throughout the world as well. So building on all that experience, Vern is also a lecturer here at Stanford University at the School of Medicine. He teaches a class that'll be happening this spring in Biotechnology Law. We'll be talking again, that's what the topic of today's conversation is, and we'll learn a little bit about it at a high level. If you are interested, again, that's a course that you can take with Vern. Even if you're not a matriculated Stanford student, go ahead and click on that link. You can learn about it more, and we'll go into more detail at the end of this session. So Vern, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have this conversation. And let's just kick it off at the very highest level. The kind of 30,000 feet is, what is biotechnology law and why is it especially critical for life sciences innovation? So I'll hand it off to you.
So I guess I can define it any way I want, since I think I started the term. But first of all, I think if you're a lawyer, by the way, or if you're wanting to be a lawyer, this is the best. I think I have the best job in the world because I get to spend my days with people that are just wicked smart, and they're doing things that are going to save lives, literally. So and then they pay you for it. It's like what a dream come true, you know. It really is sort of a dream job that I've had for a long time. Actually, my bio is a little outdated there. It's now 4 decades, unfortunately or fortunately, that I've been doing this. Literally, when I started law school, I don't think the word biotechnology existed. There was no such industry. There was no Genentech. There was no nothing. So I've in a sense been doing this before the industry even existed. So it's been a while, and I've seen pretty much the whole movie. But what is biotechnology law? So it's a way for me to think about it more than anything. But in being a lawyer in the life science industry for all this time, it has become obvious to me that the C-level and management teams and boards of a life science company end up being some of the best lawyers I know. This is born of necessity. It is much different than other areas like software and so forth, semiconductors, where the legal parts actually really matter. They're strategic issues. They're not tactical issues. So it was my observation that in training the future CEOs and C-level executives of life science companies, it would be a good thing to have them up to speed so they weren't learning on the job about all the legal issues that come up. So that's what it is.
That's a great kind of high level. And what I'd love to dig in more on is what you just, one entry point is you mentioned it's different from the considerations, say a software or semiconductor firm, which are obviously a lot of what we see here in the Bay Area, or did see a lot of in the Bay Area. And that when you're thinking about it in a life sciences firm, that they're strategic, not tactical decisions. Could you dig in a little bit, provide a little bit more detail? What are some of those differences? I mean, what makes it so different to be a CEO in a life sciences firm? Why is law so front and center for those firms versus something like a semiconductor or a chip maker or a chip designer?
So it is dramatically different. And I'll go through some of the areas of law and give as examples. Um, Again, oddly, since I started before biotech was a word, I actually did work on semiconductors. I actually have an engineering degree, shockingly. I got my engineering degree before dirt was invented, so it wasn't terribly relevant. But I am familiar with that. I worked on very wonderful companies like Altera and so forth in the Bay Area long ago. Uh, but it is very different. And why is it different? So let's just take patents as one of the leading examples. In a semiconductor company or in a software company or in a dot-com company, that sort of thing, uh, it is not uncommon, for example, for a semiconductor chip to need hundreds or thousands of patents from all kinds of players to be able to make them. And so um, licensing is an everyday thing there. There are almost routines for how you go about licensing between big companies in that industry. Uh, Almost nobody views their patents as a strategic asset where they are going to shut everybody else down that gets close to them. Conversely, in life science, for a couple of reasons, people starting from that side definitely think that their patents are going to be used to shut people down who get close to them. Now, why is there that dramatic difference? Well, I use Facebook as an example, and my numbers may be off a little bit, but they're not off in any meaningful way. But it took Facebook $200 million to become profitable. I think they raised a little more money after that, but that's what it took for them to be profitable. If you're starting a drug program, starting to develop a drug, uh, for some reason, Tufts University, I don't know how they got this role in the world, but every year they come up with the latest estimate for what it takes to develop a drug. And their latest estimates are in the range of $2 billion. So that obviously has a lot more zeros than Facebook. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're going to invest $2 billion in something, if you're a venture fund, let's say starting that out, or a big biotech that's buying a small company or starting a drug program themselves, you have to be assured that you're going to have huge margins for at least a little while on that hopefully huge product. These products do tend to be multi-billion-dollar products, and they do tend to have 90% plus gross margins. None of that's true with the software companies or the semiconductor companies. Yeah, they'll eventually get to those kinds of sales, but it takes far less money to get there. The investment is far less, so they can afford to have people getting up a little closer to them and maybe chewing away at their margins a bit. It's completely unacceptable in the drug business. If you don't have a story for why your drug will have complete exclusivity and there will be no generics for a good long while, you won't even raise a Series A. So it's a brick wall, and to some extent, it doesn't matter whether what I say is real or not. It is believed to be real amongst everyone in the industry. So regardless of whether it's right or wrong, it's true because people believe it to be true. So patents are not everything, but they are a link in a chain that if it's not there, you're not going to develop a drug. Similarly, if you take regulatory law, which is usually a relatively small part of any tech kind of company, regulatory law is also another link in the chain. If you don't have an FDA strategy for how you're going to get your trials done at a rational cost, how you're going to get them done in a rational speed so you're not starting to sell the drug 20 years from now, and how your patent, believe it or not, there are interlinks between FDA law and patent law, and if you don't have those links clearly outlined, you will, again, not get funded. So it's a brick wall. You got to know your regulatory law. And interestingly, even in more mundane seemingly things like contracts, there's a kind of thing that happens in life science called strategic partnering, where small companies will partner with big companies most often or frequently, and they will do things like develop a drug in a particular area or develop a particular drug together. These are obviously very expensive, and the big companies like sharing some of the risk with a small company and vice versa. Uh, that kind of collaboration doesn't really exist outside of life science. But yet there are entire groups at firms like Wilson Sonsini or Cooley or Latham that don't do anything except that. It is what they do, and they do it very well, and it's very complicated. These contracts are sometimes many inches thick, sometimes a foot or two thick, and it's super complicated. So the reason I bring all this up is if this is all, and that's also a link in the chain that if you screw that up, you're done. So you have all these legal links in the chain of building a valuable life science company that honestly just don't really exist in other companies. And as a result, what you see is the C-level management of a life science company, all of them will be top of the legal issues. They will know their contracts with a capital K. They will know their patents with a capital K. They will know the regulatory strategy with a capital K. So it's just different. I don't think the successful CEOs of many of the tech companies really dig in that much to any of those areas.
That's really a great overview. So just kind of summarizing what I'm hearing is one, that the longer timeline to commercialization or the higher levels of capital needed to bring a drug company or a drug to profitability is one reason you need to have a very sort of set strategy around IP. And then the other two additional links in the chain, as you call them, were a regulatory strategy, because especially pharmaceuticals and medicine are going to be highly regulated, is having that link in the train. And then finally, because of the unique way biotechnology firms often collaborate or partner with other biotechnology firms, is that contracts piece is also really essential. Those three links in the chain. And so it's important if you're a CEO or thinking of being a CEO or trying to get into senior management of any kind of these life science companies to really be aware of those legal issues and how they potentially dictate the path that your company can follow. What I'd love to do then maybe is dig a little bit more into this idea of developing an IP strategy. If I am recalling correctly, that's something that you worked on extensively. And so I'd love to, when let's say there's someone on the call right now who's thinking about that IP strategy, can you walk through some of the high level considerations? So, things that I know, the scope and breadth of patents, analysis around the freedom to operate and what that means, cost of IP ownership. And let's start with those, and just if and any others that you think are worthwhile, and just kind of walking through is, if I'm a CEO or I'm someone thinking of a life sciences company, what goes into that IP strategy?
Good question. So this is one of those very important links in the chain. And it's a term you don't really hear again outside of the life science industry. Again, I worked for semiconductor companies long ago, and if you said you had an IP strategy, it wouldn't really mean much to anybody in those industries. What that would mean to them probably is, we're going to try to file 3 patents a month, and we don't really care what they are, what they cover, or anything like that. But we're just going to try to keep the cost down and get 3 patents filed every month. That might be the deepest thinking that goes into it. And conversely, on the side of freedom to operate, meaning does anyone else have a patent that covers me? I mean, there are very large companies that are in the Bay Area that their general counsels say, we don't want engineers or scientists even looking at patents because we don't want to know about them. We specifically want our heads buried in the sand, because once we know about them, we might have to deal with them. Utterly the opposite in life science. So in life science, you will always hear these days, any venture fund that is invested in life science will view the IP strategy as being pivotal for their investment thesis. Now, it will mean different things to different companies. If you just invented CRISPR, you might want to dominate the entire world of CRISPR and come up with a patent strategy where you're going to have broad patents that cover the whole thing and medium patents that cover maybe specific disease areas, and then narrow patents that cover the exact drugs that you're going to move forward. Conversely, if you're a small molecule drug company, you want to just carpet bomb that exact small molecule. So there's always a strategy around it. Timing is also important. When you get into those partnering discussions that I mentioned with, say, a big pharma, it is one thing to walk into those partnering meetings with patent applications and say, we think we'll get patents someday. Big companies like Roche will, in an attempt, frankly, to negotiate with you, will frequently find a million reasons why you'll never get a patent and use it to bring the price down for partnering. But if you bring an issued patent into the room, then it changes the conversation. And I've had M&A discussions going on when we got patents allowed, and it completely turned the thing upside down. So timing matters, what you're filing matters, and everything, every I has to be dotted and every T has to be crossed, because for every financing and every partnering discussion, there'll be massive diligence done. Stepping back one step, I would say that some of the big pharmas do deeper diligence than you get in a lawsuit someday when you sue to enforce the patents. These people are super insightful, super smart lawyers, and they'll turn up everything, even more sometimes than the lawsuits will. So every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed, and it's a lot better to have issued patents than pending applications. And again, you need to have a Venn diagram showing what the big level strategy is. Now, freedom to operate is the flip side of all that. And as opposed to you getting patents to stop people, it's the flip side, which means you need to know in life science companies that there is no one that can stop you. And by nobody, I mean nobody. It's a very unforgiving question. You have to find everything that is or even could be a problem. Because if you've developed a drug and you're halfway through the development process and you spent $1 billion and you find out someone else has a patent that covers what you're doing, somebody's going to be all kinds of unhappy. So in life science, you have to have zero risk or very, very low risk of any freedom to operate problems from a third party. So part of the strategy is often to do those freedom to operate studies very early on. And then if you find a problem, very frequently the VCs and management will want you to just go buy it. If there's a patent out there that's owned by Harvard or some small company or whatever, before they get a bunch of money invested, they want you to just go nail that patent if it's a problem and make it an asset rather than a liability. So that is often part of the strategy, especially early on, is to go buy. I refer to these as loose bricks because they're kind of laying around out there, and someday somebody might pick it up and throw it at you. So you need to go out and pick up all the loose bricks at some point in the development of the company, or they will get picked up and thrown back at you if you have a multi-billion-dollar drug. So that's another part of the life science strategy. Again, freedom to operate. I know with some big companies here in the Bay Area that you could immediately name off the top of your head, there is an absolute aversion to knowing about any potential infringement problems. So it's exactly flipped on its head. But no venture fund's going to put money in if there's a freedom to operate risk.
Interesting. And then to your point of buying that patent, or I guess you can also license it, right? So that's itself a whole nother, that maybe comes back into those contracts, those foot thick contracts that you were saying. And I know for a lot of our audience who will be coming from a university and are themselves sort of developing within the auspices of the university, there's those licensing considerations as well if they're taking their discoveries onto a company.
Yep. And I occasionally run into naive CEOs or whatever that they will find a patent from some university. Frequently, it's from university. Because let's be real, notwithstanding what you read in the newspapers in the last few months, pretty much everything is invented at universities and healthcare at some point. If you find one of those, a naive CEO, their knee-jerk reaction will be, well, let's get prepared to fight it. And that's only the naive CEOs that want to do that. The ones that have got scars on their back will immediately say what I say, which is, let's go get it, let's buy it. And nobody, I always come back and say, look, let's say that you're a Stanford startup and you have to license a Harvard patent. So be it. But the way I think of it is, Harvard did something cool. If the drug is successful, they deserve a little bit of money to pump up the endowment or whatever. What the heck? It's an admirable university. Let's not try to get ready to fight with them. Let's try to get ready to be their friends. So only the naive management teams will try to first prepare to fight.
What does, in terms of, we got a question coming from the audience, just if you are doing research and you come up with something novel that deserves a patent, what does that look like? Just even getting your first patent or developing, what is the cost of that? I mean, because I imagine research has to go into that. Maybe not the freedom to operate, but just understanding what the landscape is, what similar patents out there might be.
Yep.
What's the timeline and cost of that?
Well, before you even go to the VCs, you have to have filed your patents, because you can't be talking about it with the VCs until you've filed your patents, because I don't think anyone ever does this purposefully, but sometimes the venture funds can be a little bit leaky. So you want your patent filed before you talk to them. So you have to do that. Now, the problem is it costs money, as you just indicated. This is a sport of kings. This is very expensive. This is not, grandpa's garage where he discovered a new doodad to file a patent on. So typically in life science, the significant firms will charge between $15,000 and $30,000, depending on the subject matter, to get a decent patent filed initially. But that's just the beginning of the money. At 12 months, you'll have to file what's called a PCT, which is another $5,000 or $10,000. And then the real money starts flowing at 30 months, because you have to file in China, Japan, Europe. You have to file in individual countries. And typically for a drug kind of portfolio, a thin portfolio might be just Europe, Japan, China, maybe. That's on the order of 100, 150,000. If you go for the Glaxo, big pharma kind of footprint, it's going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars just to file. Now, of course, every one of those filings, the patent officers always come back every time and say, oh, I think this is obvious. And there are reasons they do that are justifiable. Even if they think it isn't obvious, they will say it's obvious. And then you'll have to make your case for why you think you're entitled to the patent. Frequently, that goes for several rounds. And you're paying lawyers all along the way a lot of money. And you think that U.S. lawyers are expensive. Just wait till you talk to a European lawyer. Then you'll learn what expensive really is. So the way I put it when we decided to file a patent and when I was a GC is to make it a lot more real, and it actually has scaled pretty well over the years, is that every time we decide to file a patent here, it's pretty much the equivalent of hiring 1 or 2 FTEs, 1 or 2 scientists. So that makes it a lot more real and makes people think a lot about whether we're going to file that patent or not. Do you want 2 scientists, or do you want 1 patent application? It is very expensive. It is also very necessary. So the important ones have to be filed. And then, of course, if you actually ever get to litigation, God forbid, all of that money is trivial compared to what the litigators will spend. It will be, I think the ABA said the average lawsuit is now $10 million or something. So it's a serious sport of kings. It's not for dabblers. You got to get the money. The VCs will be glad to pay it as long as it's worth it.
Interesting. And just, backing up on one thing that you mentioned is when you're thinking of your IP strategy, you're obviously not just thinking, if you're a US-based firm, the US, you've got to be thinking globally. And so you're thinking that freedom to operate is not just your freedom to operate within the US, but in Europe, in Asia, in different countries, in specific countries. So you're thinking of what are the biggest markets, and then you're targeting them with your patent applications.
Right. So those C-level executives, not only do they have to be US law experts, but they actually kind of need to know some of the big differences between Europe and the United States, or it's pretty much United States versus rest of the world. And there are non-trivial differences that really matter. So, take EPO as an example, erythropoietin, a huge drug for Amgen. Because of various things, their European patent got blown up. And I believe it was Roche came on the market really early in Europe, and that was a huge value loss for Amgen. So you need to know not only the United States, but you need to know Europe. And there are differences. it's really, and it's really unfortunately not the kind of thing where a CEO can always have their lawyer at their side. They need to know it themselves.
And this is maybe getting a little bit ahead of us, but I'd be curious if you have any thoughts on how that kind of research. I mean, again, you have I mean, how do you do that kind of research? I mean, is there a database for patents? I mean, how do you search through patents? Is that something that you're seeing? Firms specializing, AI firms specializing, software firms, and doing that kind of research? Because I imagine it's right now very labor and time intensive, and it relies on people who have deep knowledge of the area. So how are those searches even conducted? And are you seeing changes in the way they've been done, especially in recent years?
Well, AI might change it in the future. It hasn't changed it so far because the fundamental problem is that this is a fault intolerant system. If you have a freedom to operate problem out there, you must find it. And even if it's not an issued patent or one that's filed and pending with bad claims, if there's one that could be modified to make it troublesome, you have to find it. So AI is not by any stretch fault intolerant yet. It could miss things. So as a result, people are not willing to invest the kind of money we're talking about in a drug with anything less than perfect. So the way they're done is there are definitely databases. Usually all of them are used, and searches will be run frequently I actually helped with the first freedom to operate for Cas9 for Dr. Doudna. I think there were probably hundreds or thousands of patents that were going through for that. Believe it or not, there was a weird little problem. Well, actually, I'll tell a side. I always tell stories. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not supposed to do that. Is a story okay? So
I think a story is perfect. That's where you get the context and really the deeper understanding, I think.
So Jennifer, and I'm going to talk a little, I'll also work in the idea of how to get this done for a rational cost. So places like Berkeley, and oddly not Stanford yet, but Berkeley, UC, SF Law, and other schools, law schools now have classes where students do freedom to operate studies under the supervision of a lawyer for free. And the first benefactor of one of these attempts at a class many years ago was this young woman walks in and she says she has a way of editing genes. And I will be honest, in the back of my mind, I thought, yeah, right. But I thought it might be a great class project for these students. And sure enough, they found a problem. And when the movie is made, the village idiot will be, I hope nobody's on this, well, I can't control it, I guess, but I'm going to insult Northwestern University here. I think they know they had a problem, but Northwestern had actually filed on gene editing with the Cas enzymes long before Jennifer and Emmanuel came up with it. And in fact, not only had they filed, but the patent was right on the brink of allowance. All they had to be done was a simple phone call with the examiner to get it allowed, and it would have covered all of gene editing, not just Cas9, but Cas12 and Cas, etc. But the genius at Northwestern's tech transfer office decided it wasn't worth anything, so they let it go abandoned when they really only needed to invest a few $100 more to get it allowed. Well, we found this patent in this class, and I believe Jennifer even flew back to meet the professor because I said, look, this is a problem. We got to make this go away. I didn't know, I couldn't tell on the computer yet that it had been abandoned. So she goes back there and they say, yeah, well, we abandoned it. And it was like, are you kidding me? So in any event, and there are ways to revive abandoned patents, but unfortunately they had managed to seal off any of those methods. So yeah, the original CRISPR patent was actually abandoned by Northwestern University. Now, so yeah, it took us, we had to look at thousands of patents to find that one though. So the answer to your question is they are a mile wide and an inch deep kind of things, and you got to find that one problem in all of those thousands of patents. And as a result, there's no tolerance for mistakes, and you have to look at everything that's even close. Now, what that has developed is this kind of ecosystem, at least in the Bay Area, and I think that some of the universities in Boston are going to start it. The problem is that's even more expensive than filing a patent. That might be $50,000 or $100,000 to do those freedom to operate searches. But there has been created this ecosystem of, nice, successful law schools that are now doing these things for the biotech community under the tutelage of a practicing lawyer. And I found that they're very high quality. The VCs now accept them as real, and it's a way to get it done for free, because this is a super expensive part, and it's really hard to wedge it in to an early budget of a company.
That's really interesting. Interesting to hear as
Someday
well.
I'll have to go talk to Hank Greeley at Stanford and ask why the hell Stanford's so behind here.
Doing freedom to operate studies.
Yeah.
Well, I assume it's not part of this class, so we'll assume that. But that's, but it's interesting to just understand kind of what goes into that and how broad it is, and it's not something that you're going to do maybe with your two co-founders. They're not going to do that themselves. You need to be much more methodical, supervised, professional about it.
And the people that do it have to be technically trained as well. So the students that are doing these at these law schools almost all have PhDs or at least bachelor's degrees in the relevant area. And the people that do it at the law firms all have PhDs for the most part. So you have to have technical skill and the legal skill. And I got to say, it's what young lawyers and young patent agents do for a living mostly. It's quite tedious. It can be quite rewarding, because if you do find that loose brick, sometimes you can turn it into a huge asset. But it is how young lawyers get trained quite a bit, is doing these massive freedom to operate studies.
And the reason you need that technical background is because these patents themselves are quite technical. So you need to understand the underlying processes, or is that a fair statement?
Yeah. If you're not an organic chemist and you're trying to do searches on organic chemistry molecules, it's not going to work. Conversely, if it's CRISPR and you don't know about what the differences are between Cas9 and Cas12 and so forth, it ain't going to work, because you're going to be drilling into incredible details in some of these patents.
And what kind of risk is there that if you're looking, assuming you're primarily, well, actually, it's a question. When you're doing these initial freedom to operate, are you primarily looking at the U.S. patents filed in the U.S., and is there the assumption is that will be representative of patents filed elsewhere, or are you conducting it again in several major markets? How do you take that global perspective into that initial freedom to operate study?
Great question. Again, it's zero fault tolerant. So if somebody's filed a patent in Europe and it hasn't yet entered in the United States, you must find it. So you can search the foreign databases at the same time. If the lawyers miss it, they're going to be in big stinking trouble.
On that note, how else are you seeing it now change? I guess you said you've seen the whole movie, right? Before there was even a thing called biotechnology law, you'd been working with life sciences firms. So in that time, what are some of the big changes that you have seen happen? The first is perhaps the realization that this is a specialty and creating more specialization around it. But what are some of those changes you've seen over that movie from the beginning to this point? And what are some of the changes that you're seeing right now, or that you think we might see right now? And again, I think in everybody's mind, we've gotten a couple questions, is this question of artificial intelligence. And you've already addressed it to some extent, that because AI is not, is fault tolerant, as we could say, it's not yet seen as a reliable source for some of this research. But
one comment on the side there, where AI is important now, I think, is in discovering molecules and so forth. So a bunch of companies, for example, using artificial intelligence to discover new editing enzymes. So that will be important, I think. I must admit I'm old and curmudgeonly. I have my doubts about how important it will be, but I have no doubt it will be at least of some importance in discovery, not necessarily patent searching in the near term. Where was I going with that?
Well, just the broader landscape. What has been changing over the years, and what do you see as the changes? What are you most paying attention to in the recent years?
So, if I go way back in time, I had the great privilege of working for a man named Alex Zaffaroni. Alex honestly did start the biotech industry. He started a company there in Palo Alto, across the street from Stanford, called Syntex. He also invented the idea of a business park when he did that. And he wanted to be close to Stanford because one of the drugs that Syntex had was the birth control pill, which was invented at Stanford. Alex had a very firm conviction that he wanted to have the scientists at his side all the time. So he wanted to be geographically tight with the greatest minds. So that's why Syntex was located in Palo Alto and why you see lots of companies locate near these wonderful universities. Now, Alex also realized early on that all of this IP stuff mattered. So back then, there was the semiconductor world. The first 100, maybe the 100th hire in a company, a tech company or whatever, would be a lawyer. But in Alex's version of the world, he viewed the IP as super important. And one of the first 10 or 15 people in his companies, and he founded many, would be a lawyer. And I was one of those in one of his companies. So he was the first entrepreneur to realize this legal stuff matters. And we better get it right early on because it can't necessarily be fixed later. Now, at that time, the venture community was not quite up to speed, and I'll be brutally honest. They were not good lawyers, the VC folks, and they were not even necessarily understanding the science. So it was possible to put a lot over on the VCs back in the early days in the 70s and 80s. That is not the case anymore. The venture community, the investment community is super well-educated scientists. They've got often in-house lawyers that are super smart. The venture partners themselves know these legal issues kind of like they've taken this class super well, and you can't sneak anything by them now. There's no possibility of that anymore, virtually none. Elizabeth Holmes may be being an exception, but she wasn't talking to real venture people anyway. So that's a huge change. Now, what has become, it has become so much so that if, for example, you are talking about starting a diagnostics company right now, you will get pushback from venture funds that say, well, what about the Myriad case? And what about the Lilly versus Amgen versus Lilly case or whatever? You will get pushback where venture partners and venture funds will ask about specific cases and will ask, doesn't this hurt your IP strategy? And you need to be able to anticipate those things as a C-level executive or certainly as a lawyer for these companies. And these people are super sophisticated now. So now not only do they understand what you say, but they will be asking the next question, and they will know cases by name, if you can believe that, venture partners. So it's a whole nother world now. These folks are super sophisticated.
So a big piece of it is just if you are an entrepreneur and you're trying, and you need to be on top of your game, because any funding you're going to get is going to be coming from people who are very much on top of their game, which, as they should be if they're investing significant capital into these firms. In terms of technologies, so again, you had your entire genome sequenced. I mean, do you see, are any of these introducing novel concerns or novel opportunities in terms of developing IP strategy, or do you feel that you still need to get the basics right, and the basics are the fundamentals have been similar for several decades? Or do you see any other changes? I've seen things like some firms might be relying more on trade secrets versus patents. I don't know if that's true or not. I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so a few things. But let's talk about the trade secrets quickly. I've found that usually nobody makes a decision to rely on trade secrets. The decision gets made for them because of the sheer cost of filing patents. These companies with so many smart people could be filing a patent every day. The problem is you can't afford to file a patent every day. And furthermore, I assert that the lost opportunity cost for the scientists to be futzing around with too many patents is much higher than even the cost of the lawyers. So the cost often dictates how much you keep a trade secret versus a patent. You patent the super big important stuff, and the rest you just keep your mouth shut. That said, I will say that when companies come to buy you, like Roche or Pfizer or whoever, they don't value trade secrets, and with some justification. If you think that you're going to keep something a trade secret, I mean, good luck. If you have a successful company, you'll have hundreds of employees. People will be coming and going all the time. You'll be having collaborations with other companies. You'll be having collaborations with universities, and nothing will stay a secret as a practical matter. Plus, you have to publish to make your company viable in life science. There's very little that will stay secret for more than a short period of time. So trade secrets are not the pivot point. Everything is just kept trade secret that you don't file a patent on. That's the way many or most companies work. There will be little details you might keep secret, but even those will probably walk out the door, and you can't sue everybody. There are some huge opportunities, and one I talk about in my class is there's been some recent case law developments, especially around genetics and biomarkers, that I think can make drugs hugely more valuable. I talk about this in the class, where the case law now holds that if, let's say that there's a particular patient population that has a particular genetic variant where they respond badly or they respond well to the drug, you can patent administering that drug in combination with that test, and it can be something that's used to protect against generics. So it's just as valuable as the original molecule. And we see drugs out there that are billion-dollar companies that only have these companion DX patents protecting them. So I think that's a huge opportunity, and the case law has been expanded dramatically recently, where I'm saying it cynically, but only partially, which is if you have a drug these days that you've invented, really the patent should never expire. Now, that's not necessarily the best thing for society, but I think that a good lawyer can make that true. So there are definitely opportunities that have popped up, and that could dramatically increase the value of your company when you do the present value calculation for a drug.
So this is maybe not quite personalized medicine, but this is the idea that drugs and the efficacy of a drug, it varies based on the individual, and being able to figure out what those variations are, you can file patents essentially to protect the treatment within certain subgroups of the population that have respond to the drug differently. That's really, really interesting. Well, I would love to come back to the course that you teach here at Stanford, and that again, that is available to people who are interested in taking the course. It is a credit-bearing course at Stanford. It is 10 weeks long. It's a regular credit-bearing course, but you can apply and to take just this course if you're interested. And I'd love to. So you've distilled at a very you've begun distilling 40 years of practice around this, the whole movie, as you said, up to this point. What do you try to achieve in this 10-week class? I mean, what you've said is this is not for law students, so it's not doing a freedom to operate study. This is for what you see as scientists, right, who are interested in potentially going into industry or the possibility of commercializing some of their research. So what does that look like? What are you trying to achieve in those 10 weeks?
So I try to go through each area of the law, and I take out the regulatory part. That part is so big, there's a special class just for that. I do, however, talk about the overlap between regulatory law and IP law. But aside from that, I try to go through every area of the law, basically all the law school classes that as it is special in life science. So I try to go through securities law a little bit, and I do try to get people up to speed on how the venture community works and what a cap table looks like, some of those basics. But then for contracts, for example, I talk about not contract law in general, but I talk about how contracts are different in life science, everything from a non-disclosure agreement to a partnering deal. For patents, I talk about, of course, the basis of patent law a little bit, but then I go through mostly how patents are different in life science than they are here. Data privacy is an interesting part that, unfortunately, I ran out of time last semester, but data privacy is clearly important, and the interaction with China and so forth around transmission of genetic information is important. And then I do go through the interaction between regulatory law and IP law, such as how do you extend the patent life of your patent. I then go through and I try to talk a little bit about and go through what it is like to be a public company, which also is dramatically different than a semiconductor company. With a tech company, all that really matters is, are you meeting your sales quota? I'm sure people that are in that industry will crucify me for saying that, but first order of magnitude, I think it's true. In life science, all that matters to the investor community is, how is that clinical trial going? Did a rabbit die in the safety study? And how do you deal with the public in those situations? How do you deal with the public when your scientists are publishing papers and so forth? How does that interact with the securities laws? So I try to go through, how is securities law different for life science than tech? And it is different. So that's what I do, is I go through each area of the law and I try to go around and talk about the areas that are different and special in life science.
That's interesting. And what do you want the students to be able to walk away with? I mean, is that sort of a summary of, these are scientists who need to understand, I guess it's not even the business side of things, but the legal side of things. I mean, is that a fair summary, or what do you want them to walk away from, of course?
By the way, I do go through a few of the business things. So I have them do a present value calculation for a drug, which is shocking. I won't say why, but it's actually shocking how little a drug could be worth, depending on how you look at it. But I do have to go through some of the business things. But again, that's to try to relate it to the IP, to show how you can affect the present value of a drug by getting good patents. So I try to get people to where they at least can ask good questions of their lawyers, and where they know what questions the VCs and the partners are going to ask them when they get moving down the path of starting a company. If you're asking questions that your lawyer doesn't know the answer to, you probably got the wrong lawyer. But if you don't know what questions to ask, then you won't even be able to find that out until it's too late. So that's what I try to get, is a level of knowledge where they at least can have intelligent conversations and ask intelligent questions of the legal teams as they're developing their company, and respond to questions to the investor and partner community.
And what kinds of assignments then are, so you mentioned a present value. I mean, what are the kinds of things you're asking students to do in order to get to that level of being able to ask compelling questions to their legal team?
I love the look on people's face when I say you're going to do your first assignment is a spreadsheet to do a present value calculation in a class called Biotechnology Law. But the biggest thing is, at least this year, we're going to have actually somebody start a company. Each person will start a company. And they don't have to file the articles of incorporation by law, but you got to type them up, which means just photocopy them basically. And then find a technology online, look at the patents that it'll always be a university, find something that some university has that you find for whatever reason interesting, and put together a pitch book of, here's our deal with the university, here's our patent strategy, here's our business strategy, and here's why you should invest. And I'm going to try this year having a little competition. Who knows what will happen, but all of the students will decide to invest or not invest in all of the other students' companies, and we'll have a little competition to see who gets the most investment.
That's interesting. So again, very much geared toward an eye towards your hope, scientists thinking of starting a company, and just understanding, going through kind of a simulation of that process in order to just walk through it once. So as you said, they can ask the right questions, and it's not a total surprise if they go on and do it themselves in their careers. Who do you think is the right audience for this? I mean, is it someone with a science background? Do you see engineers or business students also joining the class?
Yeah, well, engineers, being an engineer myself, I view them as scientists, just so you know. So engineers certainly, it's people that they got to have a huge interest in technology, because you're probably not going to get some of it if you're not really digging in a little bit, because I just can't stand not to. I will start to talk about CRISPR enzymes and that sort of thing. So you're going to need to at least be able to figure that out. I have found last time that we had PhD students, we had a few medical students. Of course, many were the master's students in translational medicine. We had one law student, actually, because Stanford doesn't actually, oddly, I found out, have a class like this in the law school. But you got to at least have a high-level technical interest, if not, probably better yet, some sort of technical background.
right? So your ability, again, as you said, if you're a practitioner of this, as lawyers themselves often have PhDs or at least a bachelor's or master's degree in the relevant field. Do you find that, I mean, how specialized does it get? I mean, is someone with a computer science background able, I guess for this class, it's your willingness to dig deep and a baseline technical knowledge that allows you to get up to speed on those technologies. Is that a...
Yep. So I am not a big believer that you have to be hyper specialized for two reasons. One is I will point out that every really big thing that I've been involved with in my career was usually conceived of by two people who didn't belong together, like a physicist and a molecular biologist or something like that. So I think that especially these days, the software bit can be super important. So I don't, once somebody has the chops to get, especially somebody that's going to be at Stanford, they're smart. And if you've got the technical chops to figure out artificial intelligence, you've got the technical chops to figure out CRISPR enzymes. So I'm not too hung up on the specific name of someone's degree. Furthermore, as life goes on, I always have a little session about career coaching in my classes. And one of the things I say is, when I got out of my technical degree program, again, the word biotechnology didn't exist. So I could not have planned for this because it didn't exist. And I think that things are changing faster now than they were then. So as a result, I assert that you can't plan for what you're going to be doing when you're my age because it doesn't exist yet. So don't worry about it. And as a result, your technical degree becomes almost irrelevant over time because whatever you'll be working on 10 or 30 years from now doesn't exist anyway, and you got to learn it anyhow.
And that's why opportunities like taking your class are a wonderful one. Coming back, if you're not just a student at Stanford, but again, this is available to people who are professionals out there working in these firms. So,
I saw there were a few questions here. Somebody asked the $1 or $1 billion question: if a patent never expires, can a drug be available as a generic? Well, what I'm proposing is that if the lawyers do a good job and manipulate the situation, frankly, well enough, it shouldn't expire and there shouldn't be a generic, which means the drug's worth a lot of money to the original person. Now, Congress, if they were ever functional, might take some umbrage with that. I actually know the congressman from the Silicon Valley. His name is Ro Khanna. He's a wonderful guy, and I'm going to help him with his presidential campaign. But he goes ballistic when I say stuff like that. And Congress, if ever functional, would probably change what I'm saying. But for right now, it's wide open.
And do you think that's unique to the U.S., or is that something that you're seeing in a lot of the, I don't know what you would call them, the patent regimes in other countries as well?
It would be at least relevant in the U.S. and Europe. I haven't dug too much into other countries yet. But U.S. and Europe, frankly, are 80% of all these markets anyway. So once you got those, you're done.
Well,
did that answer that question that I saw floating around?
Yeah, I see a thank you in the chat. So thank you. Yeah. So I mean I think we've addressed a lot of the others. And again, you've talked a little bit about how what's changing recently. Some of your thoughts around the potential for artificial intelligence, where you see more right now on the drug discovery side versus affecting the process of sort of filing or searching for patents at the moment, right?
Yep. And I would like to answer that one little question. I can probably do it in 30 seconds. I'm probably going to butcher the name, but Nupur, is that right? Ask also, is there a place you can find all the patents on a drug? And for small molecules, you can, because companies are more or less forced to list all the patents that cover their drug in what is called the Orange Book. There's no Orange Book, but it used to actually be an Orange Book, but it's just online now for small molecules. But for biologics, there is a thing called the Purple Book, but you're not required to list your patents in there, and most of my companies selectively list patents in there. So for biologics, the answer is really no.
And maybe one final question, which just came in, which is, do you see how are patents are both allowing companies to kind of get the returns on the intensive capital that goes into creating these drugs. But on the other hand, insofar as they restrict the ability to create generics, they restrict access too, right? So where do you see that push and pull? And maybe this is your point to where Congress needs to think through these things, and that's something that's going to happen at the legislative level. I mean, so it's both allowing the development of these drugs, but potentially decreasing or limiting their reach within.
Yeah. So Roe's response, by the way, is to just limit the term of the patents, but that doesn't solve it. All that does is make less investment in the next big drug. So I don't think that fixes it. There needs to be a more subtle approach. The way it has been is the patents expired in about 20 years, and then there were generics. Now, if my future comes true, like I'm suggesting, that won't happen. And brutally honest, I think from a societal point of view, that's inappropriate. I actually have started a nonprofit called Fair Access Medicines. Insulin right now, for example, should be free. But lawyers have long ago figured out how to manipulate that situation badly. So I don't think that's right. And I am on two sides of this, obviously. I'm a hired gun, and by gosh, if I can make a patent term infinite for one of my companies, I will. But I think it should be changed such that can't be done.
And I assume that will take, they'll take a lot of work and a lot of thought into how exactly you do that if it's not just limiting the kind of life of the patent. So.
And it'll take a functional Congress, which I don't see anytime soon.
Fair enough. On that optimistic note, Vern, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And again, if you're interested in learning more about Vern's class, please click on the link right there in the console and take a look. And maybe we'll see some of you either at future sessions like this or in the classroom. So thank you again.
Thanks for your questions. Bye-bye.